Every Friday, an old rancher stood alone at a small railway station, waiting for someone who had been gone for 3 long years. The station clerk finally asked the question no one had dared to ask. "Who are you waiting for?" What the old man revealed was a heartbreaking promise, a missing daughter, and a secret that would make one unforgettable Friday different from all the others. Stay with us until the end to discover who finally stepped off that train. If you enjoy emotional Old West stories, please like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable tales. Now, let's get started. Every Friday afternoon, just before the final train rolled into the little frontier town of Mercy Creek, an old rancher named Thomas Reed walked slowly toward the railway station. No matter the weather, he was always there. In summer, when the prairie sun burned red over the horizon, Thomas stood beside the platform, wearing his faded brown coat and holding an old leather hat against his chest. In autumn, when cold winds swept through the cottonwood trees, he waited beneath the station roof. And in winter, when snow covered the tracks, he still came. For 3 long years, Thomas had never missed a Friday. The station clerk, Samuel Carter, had watched him from behind the ticket window. At first, Samuel thought Thomas was waiting for a business partner or perhaps an old friend. But the rancher never spoke to anyone. He simply stared down the tracks. One evening, curiosity finally overcame Samuel. He stepped outside and approached the old man. "Mr. Reed," Samuel said carefully, "may I ask you something?" Thomas turned. "What is it, son? Who are you waiting for?" For several seconds, Thomas said nothing. Then his eyes returned to the distant tracks. "My daughter." Samuel felt embarrassed. He had lived in Mercy Creek for years and knew most families in the territory. Yet he had never heard Thomas mention a daughter. "What is her name?" "Clara." Thomas smiled faintly. "She was 17 when she left." "Where did she go?" "Chicago." Samuel lowered his voice. "That is a long way from here." Thomas nodded. "Her mother had just passed away. Clara's uncle promised he would take care of her until I could settle matters on the ranch. He put her on the eastbound train one Friday morning." Thomas looked down at his boots. "She held my hand before she boarded." Samuel listened quietly. "She told me, 'Papa, I'll come home someday, I promise.'" "And she never returned?" Samuel asked. Thomas shook his head. "She never came back." "Did she write?" Thomas reached inside his coat and pulled out a small, worn photograph of a young girl. "Not a single letter." Samuel frowned. "Then why do you still wait?" Thomas looked toward the tracks as the afternoon wind carried the distant sound of a train whistle. "Because," he whispered, "a promise made by a daughter is worth waiting for." The whistle grew louder. Thomas straightened his coat and tightened his grip on his hat. Samuel looked down the tracks. The train was coming. And for the first time in 3 years, Thomas had a strange feeling that this Friday would be different. The train appeared through the morning mist, its black engine breathing clouds of white steam into the cold frontier air. Thomas Reed stood perfectly still beside the platform. For 3 years he had watched hundreds of passengers step from those train cars. Every Friday his heart had whispered the same foolish hope. Perhaps this time. The train groaned to a stop. Passengers climbed down, carrying leather bags, wooden trunks, and bundles wrapped in blankets. A traveling salesman hurried toward the hotel. A family gathered their children. 2 miners climbed aboard a waiting wagon. Thomas searched every face, but Clara was nowhere among them. Samuel watched from the station doorway. He saw the old rancher's shoulders slowly fall. Then, just as the last passenger stepped onto the platform, a young woman appeared at the train door. She wore a faded blue dress beneath a dark traveling coat. In one hand, she carried a small wooden box. Her face looked tired from the long journey. She stepped down and looked around uncertainly. Then her eyes stopped on Thomas. For several seconds, neither of them moved. The young woman slowly walked toward him. "Father?" Thomas's lips trembled. His old leather hat slipped from his fingers and fell into the dust. "Clara?" She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "It is me?" Thomas took one uncertain step forward. Then another. Suddenly, the old rancher pulled his daughter into his arms. For the first time in years, he wept openly. "My little girl," he whispered. "You came home." Clara held him tightly. "I promised you I would." Thomas pulled back and looked at her face. You never wrote?" Her expression changed. "I wrote, Father, 23 letters." Thomas stared at her. 23? She nodded. "I wrote from Chicago. I wrote from St. Louis. I even wrote after I found work as a seamstress. But none of your replies ever came." Samuel, standing nearby, understood what had happened. Perhaps those letters had been lost. Perhaps someone had deliberately kept them from reaching Thomas. But none of that mattered now. Clara opened the little wooden box she had carried across the country. Inside was an old photograph of her mother and a folded piece of paper. "I kept these until I could bring them home." Thomas touched the photograph with trembling fingers. Then he smiled through his tears. "You are home now." The evening sun painted the station golden as father and daughter walked away together toward the waiting wagon. From that Friday onward, Thomas never stood at the station alone again. And whenever the train whistle echoed across Mercy Creek, he remembered that sometimes love must wait, but true promises eventually find their way home.